may signify.
Let's jump right into it. We're heading back to the freezing winter of 1855 in England to unpack one of history's most bizarre and, quite frankly, chilling unsolved mysteries. I mean, one single morning completely turned these quiet Devon villages upside down and sparked a massive panic. But for this explainer, we're going to focus heavily on the logic, the alleged hoaxes, and the sheer lengths people went to in order to explain away the impossible. Get ready, because we're looking at a case where the physical evidence literally defied reality, and spoiler alert, the logical explanations people came up with might actually be crazier than the supernatural fears.
Just picture this for a second. You wake up on a bitterly cold morning, February 9th, 1855, to be exact. You look out your window, fully expecting to see this pristine, untouched blanket of fresh snow, but instead, thousands of inexplicable tracks. And we're not talking about a few stray animal prints in the garden here. These tracks cover an area spanning several towns. Literally thousands of them, marching in a single file line, going right over incredible obstacles. So the immediate burning question on everyone's mind that freezing morning was simply, what on earth walked over our walls and across our rivers while we slept? Now, the sheer volume of the tracks was disturbing enough, for sure, but it was the shape of them that instantly sent absolute terror through the locals. The tracks looked exactly like footprints left by a cloven hoof. Now, as you probably know, a cloven hoof is just a hoof divided into two toes, kind of like a goat or a pig. But you have to remember the deep-rooted folklore of 19th century England. A cloven hoof walking upright, well, that meant only one thing. It was traditionally associated with demonic or devil-like figures. So yeah, a deeply unsettling unease spread through the towns like wildfire.
Okay, let's dive into this impossible path. Because honestly, the shape of the prints was really just the beginning of the nightmare. The physical evidence left behind totally defied logic. These tracks didn't just meander through the woods or follow a normal road like any sane creature. No, they went places no person and certainly no normal animal could physically go.
The trajectory of these footprints is just staggering. First, they went straight up the sides of high walls and fences. Then they continued right into enclosed gardens, and get this, up onto the roofs of houses. And then, probably the most impossible part of the whole shebang, a set of footprints went right up to the edge of the freezing River X. And then just continued on the other side, as if whoever or whatever left them had passed straight across the water. Plus, when they hit those high walls, they'd continue perfectly on the other side, leaving the snow on the very top of the wall completely untouched.
And the anomalies don't stop there. It really brilliantly illustrates just how physically impossible the whole event was. Some of the tracks would come to a dead, abrupt stop in the middle of nowhere, almost as if whatever made them had just suddenly vanished into thin air. Other times, the tracks stopped abruptly, completely disappeared for a massive break, and then simply picked back up as if nothing happened. Anyone actually trying to track this trail would have been absolutely confounded.
So with evidence like this, impossible leaps, untouched snow on walls, literally walking over water, and that ominous cloven hoof shape, well, you can imagine the reaction. The unease morphed incredibly quickly into outright panic. Normal daily life in County Devon just ground to a complete halt. We're not talking about a few worried neighbors gossiping over the fence here. We are talking about a rapid escalation of mass hysteria gripping multiple towns all at once.
A massive chunk of the population firmly believed these footprints could only have been made by the devil himself. And adding fuel to that fire, widespread rumors suddenly popped up about actual sightings of a literal devil-like figure roaming the Devon area. People were terrified, but they didn't just hide in their homes. Terrified townspeople actually armed themselves, formed mobs, and scoured the freezing landscape, desperately trying to hunt down this beast. But guess what? Despite thousands of tracks and armed mobs everywhere, they found absolutely nothing. No beast, no devil, no answers.
And this brings us to a really fascinating divide in how we, as humans, process terrifying, unexplained events. This is the real crux of our explainer today. On one side, you have supernatural belief, a large portion of the population completely accepting that the devil was actively stalking through their towns looking for sinners. But on the other side, you have skeptical logic. These were the folks who absolutely refused to believe the devil was taking a winter stroll, so they scrambled. They desperately tried to force earthly, logical explanations onto a deeply illogical event.
So, I want to ask you directly, put on your detective hats for a minute. Do these logical theories actually make any sense? When we're faced with the impossible, sometimes the hoaxes and the rationalizations we invent are honestly just as fascinating as the mystery itself.
Let's evaluate the highly questionable theories the 1855 skeptics proposed to avoid admitting that something supernatural might have happened.
Let's walk through some of these theories together, because the links people went to are just incredible. One theory, the townspeople might have just imagined the whole thing. The logical flaw there, well, it completely ignores the physical tracks seen across multiple towns by hundreds of different people. Another theory was hopping mice. Yes, hopping mice. But mice, hopping or not, do not leave massive, perfectly shaped cloven hoof marks in the snow. Others theorized a weather balloon might have floated across the landscape dragging a rope. But again, think about the physical evidence. A dragging rope makes a continuous line or random sweeps. It absolutely doesn't leave perfectly spaced, uniform cloven hoof prints that magically hop over walls without disturbing the snow.
Now, what's really fascinating here is the kangaroo defense. Some people boldly claimed the tracks were caused by kangaroos that had escaped from a local zoo. I mean, it sounds kind of vaguely scientific, right? An exotic animal on the loose? But the fundamental flaw is that the footprints looked absolutely nothing like kangaroo tracks. A kangaroo leaves long foot tracks in a big tail drag, not a single file line of small cloven hooves. It really proves how much the skeptics were grasping at straws, you know? Just trying to fit a square peg into a round hole to avoid the terrifying unknown.
So, what about the mass hysteria argument? Were people really just nuts? Well, while psychological panic definitely explains the armed mobs and the wild rumors of a devil figure, it completely fails to explain the physical environment. Mass hysteria cannot physically press thousands of hoof prints into the snow over vast distances in a single night. And mass hysteria certainly cannot cause snow on top of a wall to remain perfectly untouched while tracks appear on either side of it. The psychological explanation just straight up fails the physical evidence test.
Let's pull back and look at the timeline here. In just a single 24-hour period, these villagers' world was totally upended. Morning brings the shocking discovery of thousands of tracks. By midday, they're tracing impossible paths over rivers and onto roofs. By nightfall, armed mobs are hunting a beast in the freezing dark. And then we jump to the present day. Despite all our modern science, despite all those skeptical theories of hopping mice and escaped kangaroos, the strange phenomenon of the devil's footprints remains completely unexplained. It is still an unsolved mystery.
I want to leave you with a really provocative thought directly from our source material. It goes, perhaps it is easier to believe in unlikely explanations rather than accept that the devil visited Devon one cold winter's night and stalked through the towns looking for sinners to drag down to hell. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Do we cling to absurd logic, like balloons and hopping mice, just to avoid facing the terrifying, unexplained unknown? Think about that the next time you see a strange track in fresh snow. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep your curiosity sharp, and I'll catch you next time.
Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we are jumping right into a chilling modern mystery that is actually rooted deep in a really tragic historical event. Have you ever looked at a photograph and spotted something that absolutely shouldn't be there? Something that totally defies logic and just leaves you questioning what's real? Well, we're unpacking a fascinating case study that perfectly bridges the gap between modern documentation and centuries-old local lore. We're going to explore the evidence, the history, and the intense debate surrounding what's known as the Ghost Girl of Wem Town Hall.
Take a look at this quote straight from our sources. The image of the girl's face on the pictures has never been properly explained. I mean, think about that for a second. In an age where literally everything can be debunked, filtered, or analyzed down to the very last pixel, we have this piece of visual evidence that remains a stubborn anomaly. This isn't just dramatic flair, it's really the crux of why this story endures. It's an unsolved puzzle, and we're going to map out exactly why it remains so incredibly baffling.
Section 1. The Modern Hall Fire. Okay, so to really understand the mystery, we first have to understand exactly how this evidence was captured. And the sequence of events starts with absolute chaos. The Wem Town Hall is completely consumed by massive destructive fire. It's an intense scene. Flames are tearing through the structure, and a local photographer is on site documenting the whole tragedy. So after the fire is finally put out and the smoke clears, the photographer heads into his darkroom to develop the photos. It's supposed to be a completely standard routine. But as those images process, a ghostly figure of a young girl is discovered, standing right in the middle of the roaring flames. She isn't a firefighter, she isn't a rescued civilian, she is something else entirely.
And that brings us to a massively compelling question. Is this a real ghost caught on film? When you're presented with an anomaly like this, human nature just naturally pushes us to find an answer, right? Are we actually looking at supernatural phenomena captured through a camera lens, or is it something much more grounded in science and physics?
This is really the pivot point of our explainer, where we need to step back and look at the evidence completely objectively.
Moving on to Section 2, Experts versus the Skeptics. As you'd expect with any extraordinary claim, this photograph immediately sparked a really intense rational debate. And look, I'm not here to tell you what to believe. I just want to lay out the arguments from both sides so you can evaluate the data for yourself. On one hand, photographic experts rigorously analyzed both the developed photo and the original negative. Their conclusion? The materials were completely unaltered and unfaked. No darkroom trickery, no double exposure, no tampering whatsoever. The camera captured exactly what was there. On the flip side, skeptics argue that, sure, while the photo wasn't tampered with, the image of the girl is simply a convenient trick of the light. They suggest that the chaotic mix of billowing smoke, intense flame, and harsh shadows basically created a momentary optical illusion right at the exact fraction of a second the picture was taken. It's that thing our brains are hardwired to do, seeing human faces in random patterns, a phenomenon known as pareidolia.
So I want to ask you directly, based on that skeptic's view, do you think that's possible? Can a totally random combination of smoke and fire perfectly mimic the distinct face and form of a young girl? I mean, it would require an unbelievable combination of timing, lighting, and chemical reaction. But then again, nature is definitely capable of incredibly complex illusions. Keep that in the back of your mind as we move forward, because the context here is about to get so much deeper.
Section 3, The Tragedy of 1677.
To find a potential identity for our mystery figure, we actually have to look centuries into the past. Because, well, history has a funny way of repeating itself. It turns out the modern fire wasn't the first time this specific location was devastated by flames. Way back in the year 1677, the town hall burned down in a catastrophic inferno. So we have this direct parallel, a massive fire in 1677 and a massive fire in the modern day. The location is exactly the same. The destruction is the same. And according to local lore, there is a very specific tragic thread connecting these two events across hundreds of years. An event that deeply scarred the town.
Which brings us to Section 4, Jane Sherm's haunting legacy.
This is where the whole thing shifts from a curious photograph to a really profound human tragedy. According to historical records, that devastating fire of 1677 wasn't arson, and it wasn't a natural disaster. It was a terrible accident. The fire was started by a young girl named Jane Sherm. She was only 14 years old. The historical accounts state that her simple, accidental action of just dropping a candle was the spark that brought the entire town hall down. And tragically, Jane's fate was sealed that night. Locals maintain that she was one of the people who died in the very blaze she accidentally created. Her mistake didn't just end her life, it permanently etched her name into the dark folklore of the town.
And this really brings us to the most emotional aspect of the sources we're reviewing today. Why would a spirit linger for that long? Well, according to local legacy, Jane Sherm's spirit never actually left. The town's folklore suggests she is anchored to the site by the immense, enduring guilt of destroying her community and claiming the lives of so many others. When the modern town hall caught fire, believers argue it wasn't just a building burning. It was Jane's 300-year-old trauma manifesting in the flames, caught for a split second on a modern camera as a continuation of her haunting town legacy.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this final thought. You've seen the unfaked photographic evidence, you've heard the skeptics' very rational arguments about optical illusions, and you've learned the tragic historical legacy of 14-year-old Jane Sherm. So what's your takeaway here? Are we simply looking at pareidolia, a one-in-a-million trick of the light and smoke? Or is it possible that image could be a 300-year-old apology from a grief-stricken girl forever tied to the flames? Weigh the history against the modern evidence and decide the truth for yourself. Keep questioning, keep learning, and thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.
The Ghostly Vengeance of Anaa. Welcome back, everyone. Today we're stepping way back in time to explore a seriously chilling piece of historic folklore. We're talking unchecked power, deep-seated corruption, and the inescapable, heavy nature of guilt. We're going to look at the incredibly tragic tale of Anna Dorothea Swartz, and a man whose entire life became defined by a very literal, very dark symbol. All right, let's just dive right into this. I want you to picture this for a second. You're walking down a cobblestone street, right? And you see this wealthy, impeccably dressed man just going about his daily business. But he's got a hangman's noose permanently tied around his neck. It's a bizarre and, honestly, deeply unsettling image, isn't it? It immediately makes you wonder, why? What on earth could force a powerful man to wear the ultimate symbol of a condemned criminal every single day of his life? Well, that is the exact mystery we're unraveling today. So this whole bizarre situation stems from a terrifying power dynamic. In one corner, we've got William Salisbury. He was a wealthy, powerful landowner with a massive stone house near Catskill, New York. But here's the thing. He was also notoriously mean-tempered, vicious, and frankly, just brutal. And completely trapped in his orbit was Anaa Dorothea Swartz. She was a young Scottish immigrant who came over to America looking for opportunity. But instead, she found a trap. See, Salisbury had paid for her ticket across the ocean, and because of that, he essentially treated her like a slave. He told her she wouldn't see a single penny until her debt was worked off. She was entirely vulnerable, while he acted like a master who was completely untouchable. Salisbury's paranoia and cruelty literally knew no bounds. The guy seemed to take immense pleasure in making others suffer, and he was constantly looking for excuses to abuse Anaa. But the catalyst for the ultimate tragedy, it happened when he caught her just walking past a closed door. He instantly accused her of eavesdropping on a private conversation he was having with his wife. Ignoring her desperate protests, she's pleading with him. He drags her outside and whips her relentlessly. Her entire body was left covered in welts and bruises. It was this horrific breaking point that finally pushed Anaa into a desperate choice. She had to escape. Let's look at the timeline of what happened next, because the rapid escalation is just horrifying. In hour 1, Anaa flees into the woods, but by hour 3, Salisbury discovers she's missing, and his anger just explodes into total chaos. He jumps on his horse, cursing, swearing, and relentlessly hunts her down until he spots her running through the trees. And then at hour 4, the true horror begins. He takes a cord, ties her hands directly to the tail of his horse, and drags her all the way back to his house. By hour 5, when they finally arrive, Anaa was dead. Her frail body had been literally dashed to pieces on the unforgiving rocks of that country road. Salisbury was quickly arrested and put on trial for murder. But get a load of his defense in court. He actually said, "I was only trying to teach her a lesson." The horse became frightened and bolted. Are you kidding me? He's standing there in a court of law trying to explain away a tattered, bloody mess of a human being as a mere tragic accident. He claimed the horse just reared up, threw him off, and dragged the poor girl to her death without his consent. Zero responsibility taken. None. But fortunately, the jury wasn't buying it. They didn't believe a single word of his story. He was sentenced to hang by the neck for the crime of murder. And for a fleeting moment, it really seemed like true justice was going to prevail. The jury saw right through his pathetic lies and handed down the ultimate penalty. In that brief moment, the hangman's noose represented the inescapable arm of the law finally catching up to a man who basically thought he was a god. But then, we hit a number that completely derails that justice: 99. See, Salisbury was ridiculously rich, and back in this era, money could buy you almost anything, including your own life. He used his vast wealth to blatantly bribe the judge. The result of that bribe? His death sentence was miraculously suspended until he reached the completely absurd age of 99 years old. It was just a sickening display of legal corruption. It proved that for someone like Salisbury, the law was just another minor obstacle he could buy his way out of. Now, the judge did attach this highly bizarre two-part legal condition to the suspended sentence. Step 1, Salisbury was ordered to wear a hangman's noose around his neck at all times to serve as a constant reminder of his brutal crime. Step 2, he had to report to the judge in Catskill once a year just to verify he was actually still wearing it. What's so fascinating to me here is the transformation of the noose itself. It shifted from being this tool of definitive justice into a glaring, everyday symbol of the exact corruption that let a murderer walk free. But here's the catch. That purchased freedom quickly morphed into its own kind of prison. He bore the permanent mark of a murderer. Wherever he walked, the townspeople saw that noose. They pointed, they stared. They knew exactly what he was and what he did. He couldn't hide from his shame. The community completely shunned him, transforming this once wealthy, powerful landowner into a total outcast. Nobody wanted anything to do with him. And this is where the folklore takes a genuinely terrifying turn. Anaa's ghostly vengeance began to manifest. Rumors absolutely exploded across the area. People claim they saw her spirit sitting on his stone garden wall, with these hellish flames rising straight from her fingertips, and unearthly laughter echoing out in the dark. And the sightings only grew more violent. Night after night, folks reported seeing a bloody skeleton with streaming hair and tattered garments tied to a ghastly horse, just dashing past his window. The clatter of hooves and her terrified shrieks relentlessly assaulted his home. The sheer scale of this terror was so intense that it affected the entire town. I mean, people would literally walk miles out of their way just to avoid passing by Salisbury's house. The supernatural activity, those horrible screams of the dead echoing through the night, they were so visceral and disturbing that the community practically abandoned the entire area around his property. So Salisbury was left entirely alone with the chaos he'd created. He became the textbook definition of a recluse, driven to complete and utter isolation. As the years ticked by, this became Salisbury's absolute reality. He just stopped speaking to anyone. He spent all his time alone in that huge stone house. And honestly, he was driven completely insane by the nightly torment of the murdered girl's ghost. He was entirely trapped in a prison of his own making, permanently haunted by his own trauma. Which brings us to the final, shocking twist of retribution. One day, William Salisbury was found dead. He was hanging from the ceiling of his house. And the instrument of his death? Yep, it was the very same hangman's noose that he had been ordered to wear around his neck all those years ago. The noose completed its ultimate symbolic journey, finally acting as the instrument of vengeance that the corrupt court had denied Anaa in the first place. So, I want to leave you with this profound, lingering question. Was Salisbury actually forced into taking his own life by the literal, supernatural ghost of Anaa? Or was he slowly, agonizingly driven to suicide by the inescapable, crushing weight of his own profound guilt and remorse? It's one of those questions that completely blurs the boundaries between terrifying folklore and the very real psychological toll of committing an unspeakable evil. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this deep dive leaves you with something fascinating to chew on today.
Do not come any closer.
There is no escape.